Welcome to Shooting Straight with Brad and David. I'm David Klaus, your Navajo County Sheriff, and my partner.
I'm Brad Carline, your Navajo County Attorney.
So this month we're joined by Megan Kintner with the Arizona Association of Counties,
yes.
ACO for short, and you're the legislative specialist
yes.
with ACO. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's one of my favorite drives in the state coming up here from Phoenix, so it's a good day.
Especially get out of the heat this summer. But we just wrapped up another legislative session, and I know you represent ACO at the legislature for us, and we want to talk a little bit about what this last legislative session brought to Arizona and what we can expect when these new laws are enacted. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about what ACO is and what you do with ACO.
All right. Well, the Arizona Association of Counties, ACO, is an organization that was formed in 1968. So we've been around for, well, at least by Arizona standards, that's ancient, right? So we represent all 15 counties, and then we represent all 10 county elected officials at the legislature. So that's the attorney and the sheriff, but we also represent the assessors, the treasurers, the recorder, the clerks, the justices of the peaces, the constables, everybody. So we're quite busy. We work on a wide range of issues. We work on education issues, public safety issues, election issues. We're all over the map. It's a really interesting job because I get to learn new things all the time. And our organization is primarily tasked with working for the county elected officials and advocating on your behalf at the state legislature. I have always enjoyed local government. I've for a while worked with local governments for ADOT, and so coming over to the association was a great way to keep working with the local governments, and those are the governments that are closest to the people, and that's something that I really enjoy. So great organization. We have a very small staff. There's only 5 of us. We have our executive director, then we have a 2-person legislative team. We have our person who takes care of all of our communications and plans our conferences, and then we have our office manager who has been with us. I think she celebrated her 35th anniversary. Wow. So I don't know what we're going to do. She's a gem.
Sue can't retire.
Sue can never retire. She's a gem. So we do have a board of directors, and I know Brad has spent a lot of time on our board. So we have a 30-person board, and there are 15 members that represent all 15 counties. There are 10 members that represent each of the elected offices that I mentioned earlier, and then we have a 5-person elected board that's elected every biannually at our conference, and those can be members from, I think right now it's pretty treasurer and recorder heavy, but it could be any of our members can run for those positions. And yeah, that's about that summary.
So legislative session begins in January, and this year was one for the ages.
Oh, it certainly was. So the record, we almost beat a record. The all-time record for the longest legislative session is 173 days, and we clocked in at 171 days. That is a very long session. Statutorily, the legislature is supposed to complete their work, set a state budget after 100 days, and of course they can extend that deadline basically just by a vote. They can continue that on if they need to, and usually they do. I think, gosh, in my 9 years, I think I recall one session where they were at 95 days, but typically they may go from 110, 120, 130 days, but 171 days is very long, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It does become stressful at the end, though, when we start pushing the session that long, because the state fiscal year begins on July 1st, and so one of the biggest tasks, or probably the most important task that the legislature does every year, is set a state budget. And when they start pushing into June and they don't have a budget yet, then that starts making folks nervous and people get a little cranky. So it was a very long session, and COVID made things quite interesting as well. Obviously, COVID's been going on for quite a while, but this session was interesting. The Senate opted to shut down completely, so lobbyists couldn't enter the building to testify for committee. We also couldn't meet with members in that building, and we also couldn't attend caucus, and that particular caucus is not televised. However, on the House side, they kind of had a hybrid. They let the committee chairs decide what they wanted to do. So a committee chair could opt to allow in-person testimony, but they also could require all just Zoom testimony. And then their caucus is actually televised, so we could catch that.
What is a caucus?
So a caucus is, thank you. So a caucus, sorry, sometimes I get on my little legislative cap, and then no, a caucus is when all of the Republicans or all of the Democrats, they will all get together as a group, and then they have discussion, kind of like the discussion that we're having today, about all of the various bills that they are considering. And caucus is one of the necessary steps in the legislative process. All of the bills have to go through caucus. And as I mentioned, the House has historically televised theirs. The Senate, though, you typically have to go in person. But we weren't able to do that for the last couple of years because of COVID restrictions.
To give the watchers of our show an idea, how many bills are dropped every session?
Oh gosh, well, it's always into the it's always probably around maybe 1,500. But this session was different. We had almost 1,900 bills dropped, and that I think in part is due to the fact that the last legislative session wrapped up really quickly because of COVID. Obviously, it was a new thing. Yeah, very abruptly. Yeah, very abruptly. And what the legislature did is they just let a lot of bills die in the process, and then they came up with what they referred to as a skinny budget, just basically a really basic, easy budget that was going to keep the lights on. Mm-hmm. And they abruptly stopped things. So that, I think, factored into why this legislative session was so long, because I know a lot of legislators were very frustrated. And granted, I was frustrated too as a lobbyist. I was trying to get stuff done too, right? A lot of bills died, so the legislators introduced not only the bills from that last legislative session, but any new ideas that they came up with in the interim. And so we had a lot of bills this year.
On ACO's side, you're interested in bills that impact counties.
Yes.
So about how many bills did you have to track?
Oh gosh, we tracked over about 800 bills this year. And keep in mind, we're really just a two-person legislative team. Our executive director is awesome and has actually been with us for 20 years, and she has a lot of legislative experience. So she picks a lot up, but she still has to be the boss, so she can't do as much. So yeah, that's a lot of bills, and we took active positions through our board that I described earlier on about 160 of those bills, and that's in addition to the bills, I think it was about 14 bills that we were running proactively on behalf of the counties. So we're busy.
When you say active position, what do you mean by an active position?
That would either be a position of support, oppose, or neutral. We don't take the neutral position very often, but sometimes we do. So our process, we basically, my opinion on a bill doesn't matter. I can really like something or really not like something, but it doesn't matter. We go to our Legislative Policy Committee, which is comprised of members from all of our different offices and that we represent, and they meet on a weekly basis during the legislative session, and they actually vote on what positions ACO will take. So typically what they'll do is, for example, the county attorney representative on that board will talk to the fellow county attorneys, we'll solicit feedback. We do have a system where we send out all of the bills to our members and ask that you read them and that you look at them and that you give us any thoughts that you may have, and we present the information that we hear back, and then it's the member of the LPC's job to talk to their fellow county attorneys or fellow sheriffs, and then they actually vote on what position they would like ACO to take. So we can oppose things, we can be supportive of things, and like I said, sometimes we take a neutral position. Just because we oppose something doesn't necessarily mean that there's not room for compromise. If our LPC decides, okay, we're going to oppose this bill, then the first thing that I would do as a lobbyist is I would reach out to the member that's running that bill, and I would reach out to maybe another lobbyist that I know is working on that bill, or any other kind of advocacy group that's working on that bill, and I would just relay what the specific concerns are about the bill and see if there's a way that we can meet halfway and create good policy for Arizonans.
So what I'm hearing is actually a major role of you and the ACO staff is educating the members of the legislature about what the counties do, how these proposals would impact not only the counties, but the citizens of the counties.
Yes.
So it sounds like there's a lot going on. You're tracking 800 bills, but it's not just, you don't have a lot of time for each one either, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it moves fast, and things kind of die, then they get picked up. And
yes, there's a hard deadline at the legislature for kind of when. So legislators can't just keep introducing bills. Thank God. I don't know what I would do. They can't just
1900's enough.
Oh yeah, that's enough. No, there's actually a deadline, and so there's basically a cutoff, and in the House and the Senate. And so then, we'll know what the full universe of bills are. But yeah, no, there is a deadline, thank goodness.
And about how many bills got passed?
For about almost 500. It was 490 something, which is actually, like I said, that's quite a bit. I mean, last year was a record low, but that was definitely, this year was again, but I think because of COVID.
How many actually moved through the process?
Well, that's a good, probably I would say about half. There's a lot of hurdles built into the legislative system. There is actually quite a big vetting process. For a bill to become a law, it has to be introduced, then it has to be first and second read, then it has to be assigned to a committee, then it has to actually go to that committee, it has to pass that committee. Sometimes a bill can be assigned to multiple committees. For example, if a bill has a fiscal note, what we would call a fiscal note, so basically if you run a bill and it has a dollar amount attached to it, like you're asking for an appropriation for the counties, then that bill also needs to go to the Appropriations Committee. Frankly, sometimes if the Speaker or the President, the leaders in each of the chambers, if they don't like a bill, a great way to kill a bill, because you only have about 4 or 5 weeks to get the bill through all those committees, is to just assign it to as many committees as you can possibly justify. So it has to make it through all those committees.
Overload them with work.
Yeah, it has to make it through all those committees. It has to go through caucus, what we talked about earlier, where the entire body, the two separate parties then discuss that bill. Then it has to go through a committee called Rules, and the Rules Committee is basically a committee where the attorney who works, there's an attorney in the House, an attorney in the Senate, and they will look at the bill and determine whether or not it is constitutional and in proper form. And so it has to be constitutional and in proper form to pass through Rules. A lot of bills actually die in Rules. That's a great way to kind of cull the herd, because especially if leadership doesn't like an idea too much, then they'll just say to the Rules Chair, hey, just don't put this on an agenda. That can happen, and then, but it's still not done. Then it has to go to a full, to the full body, and then we have something called COW, and it's not an animal. It's actually a committee of the whole, and that's a process where the entire chamber. So now it's kind of like I don't know, caucus for everybody. So you have all the Democrats and all the Republicans then get together on the floor, and then they have the opportunity to discuss the bill. That's also another opportunity for bills to be amended. And so we are always looking out for amendments, because that can change a lot. And those amendments actually don't have to be posted ahead of time, so you can get some surprises. So we keep a close eye on the floor. It has to make it through that COW process, and then it has to go to a final vote, right, out of that chamber, and then it has to cross over to the other side and then do the entire thing all over again. And if anything about the bill changes in the second chamber, it has to go back to the first chamber for a final vote.
One of the things you had mentioned about ACO is they have a set of bills that they're proactive, and essentially they're the ones that are finding a legislator to introduce it and try to get it because we believe it benefits the county and our citizens. What were some of the criminal justice ones that were on ACO's list of bills to try to get through?
Let's see. Well, actually you all had a lot. You were active last year. One of the items that actually did make it through was a bill that had to do with Class 6 open felonies. The Class 6 felony charge is the lowest, the least severe felony charge. This was an idea that actually came up. A legislator came up with it a few years ago, and he wanted to say for that county attorneys will often take a Class 6 open felony, and they will say to a person, hey, if you complete all this probation and if you do everything you're supposed to do, usually it's for people who have like a first-time drug charge or something, they don't have a history, then we'll say, hey, if you go and do your probation and you complete it successfully, then we'll go ahead and we'll drop that down to a misdemeanor, so then you don't have a felony on your record. And it's a great motivating tool for people to really make sure that they're doing all the things that they need to do. One of the challenges for those people, is that while they're in this process of going through probation, is they will actually come up, if they apply for a job or if they apply for housing, they will come up as a felon. And obviously that can cause them some hardships when it comes to getting jobs, finding a place to live, and that in turn makes it even more difficult to successfully complete the steps that the court has ordered them to take. So we actually passed a bill this year, and it has a little bit of a delayed effective date. We do have some programming that needs to happen, but the courts are basically going to create this new category for these folks as an undesignated category, so that when they are in that zone, when they're trying to finish up their probation, they will not come up as a felon when they're applying for a job and they're applying for housing.
But that wasn't just a bill this year. That actually came up a few years ago by somebody other than ACO.
Yes.
I remember being down to testify on a different bill in committee, and you grabbed me to talk about this one. And one of the challenges, the way it was originally drafted, is for us to get treatment to people, they have to be on felony probation. And most of these people that we're doing this for have a substance abuse or maybe a mental health issue, and it would have taken away all those treatment dollars. So the county attorneys and the sheriffs stepped up and said, this is how we can do it right to make it work for the people going through the system, protect the community, and benefit everybody.
Yes, yeah, that was in 2018. I think I grabbed you and I made you go over to the legislature with me. Yeah, that was 3 years ago. So it can take, and we often find that, especially with a big issue like that, when you're talking about changing something as big as that and having to have the courts kind of come up with a coding system for it, and it's a lot of programming. It definitely took a few years to get it through.
Well, another one that was on our proactive list was the incompetent non-restorable.
Yes.
I think we've been pushing that more than a dozen years now.
Yeah, I believe you're right. I do. That bill, I think that we're making a lot of progress though. So that bill applies to people, there's a certain category of folks, in order to actually stand trial, you have to be able to assist in your own defense. You have to be mentally competent to stand trial. And there's a very small group of people, there's not a lot of them, but they are quite dangerous to themselves and others, who are not mentally fit to stand trial. And so then they're put into a process, it's about almost a 2-year process, where they're under treatment, trying to be restored to competency so that they can actually assist in their own defense and actually, stand trial. And there's a very small subset of people who are not restored to competency during that process. There's another, there's another window of time that that there can be an attempt to restore them. But there are people that go through all of that and they're still not competent, and because they're not competent to stand trial, we actually can't keep them, so we have to release them. So then you have people who are very severely mentally ill who are going back out in the community and reoffending over and over.
But some of them are exceptionally dangerous.
Yes.
We have an example here in Navajo County from about 3 years ago now of a guy that got off the Greyhound bus in Holbrook, walked down the mesa, and you probably remember this, went into a family's home who happened to be at the park with their kids. They come back, and here is this guy eating food in their living room, watching TV, and threatened to kill them if they didn't get out of their house. He was arrested, sent for restoration because he had mental health issues. I actually got the report within 3 days, and I'd never seen a report that mentioned, I think, over 20 times, this guy's going to kill somebody. But we couldn't use the criminal justice system to either get him help or protect the community, and because we don't have this law yet, he was essentially released. We did a little finessing with the mental health statutes to get him down to ash for a limited period, but even they couldn't hold him for long.
And so every county has scenarios with that. We know it's a small number, but it's a significant where I think legislation like this.
There's one that scares us, what could happen someday if we can't find a way to get them off the streets and get them the help that they need.
And then counties, again, we always talk about how these things impact. We're housing them. The sheriff is housing in all these things for years.
I assume he was in isolation.
For a couple of years, and why we're trying to go through this process. And
what were some of the other proactive ones that ACO was working on behalf of the criminal justice system?
Well, I'll mention another success, one of our bills that deals with reentry. One of the things that the attorneys and the sheriffs have been talking about now for years is being really proactive and trying to deal, as you mentioned, with folks that have substance abuse issues and mental health issues. And so we introduced a pair of bills, one for the sheriffs and one of the attorneys, that were really good bookends. The sheriff's version made it through mostly. Basically, that was reentry programming.
When you say reentry, what does that mean?
Yes, so reentry programming, so as folks leave the jail system, that would be making sure that they are connected with mental health services, substance abuse services, housing, potentially transportation, employment. So connecting all of those people as they are leaving so that they're less likely to slip back into old habits. Your kind of neighbors down in Yavapai County actually started a pilot program a few years ago in their jail, and they have a system where as soon as people, at least as soon as it's possible, possible. When people enter the jail system, they have a screening process that they put people through to identify what potential issues they may have, and then they have been connecting them with housing, transportation, employment, treatment, as soon as they go out, and they've actually seen some good results. And so they came to the rest of the sheriffs and basically said, hey, we have this good idea. You want to, let's want to see if we can all do it. And the sheriffs were very interested. So we actually did manage to get some money in the budget this year for a few counties, for Yuma County, Pinal County, and Yavapai County, to expand the pilot program in Yavapai County, and then create some pilot programs in Pinal and Yuma counties, just to kind of keep growing it and expanding it. And then we're also tracking all of the data. So there's a lot of transparency. All of the data that's going to be collected from this program is going to be sent over to a repository that anybody would be able to access. That way we can make sure that we're using the dollars in the smart ways. And as I always say, you guys can steal ideas from each other, right?
Yeah,
we like to.
Yeah, and we do. The sheriff in Yavapai County, we have these discussions all the time about this is real comprehensive criminal justice reform, where we're restoring people into society or re-entering society, and they're being beneficial.
And while we like to take the ideas from other counties, we're not cookie cutters either. For what may work in Yavapai doesn't necessarily work in Navajo, and we have to educate through you and ourselves going down there to make them say that they can't just tell us to do what Yavapai County's doing.
Oh yeah.
We don't have the same resources.
It's not just resources, and not only monetary resources, but resources of the providers in the area.
Exactly.
So another good proactive legislative win for Navajo County was some school safety.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a $2.5 million appropriation for 4 counties, and Navajo was included in that, for you to develop some school safety programming.
Yeah, so that's additional funding that we're looking to get.
So what are you going to look to do with that money?
So right now we're looking to do kind of a sharing of, so you got school districts throughout all these counties, and this is looking at this statewide. So response times and getting the information quickest is one of the best ways that first responders, public safety, can go respond to these things and quickly monitor it. So just a quick snapshot of it is we have our dispatch centers, right, are kind of the central call taking and dispersing of that information. So when people call 911, they kind of get overloaded. So kind of what we're looking at is where our dispatch centers can be tied into the whether it be a direct button or a link between the schools to our dispatch center for an emergency help button. You have hard line or soft button and hard buttons, kind of like in the bank robbers. They have the button that not the bank robbers, but in the robbery situation. So we're going to have that, hopefully have that type of communication from the schools directly to our dispatch centers for an emergency help button. Then we're also hoping to tie into surveillance cameras systems in each of these schools where they can monitor those live in our dispatch center. So if they do see an active threat or a problem, we don't have to wait for that information. Those that are going to disperse the information will see it firsthand.
So will your command center or one of the local PD command centers also be able to tie into that direct access to the video?
Yes, and that's where we're looking for different vendors that can put this, tie all these surveillance systems back into our dispatch center, and then we can see the schools live, and then we can also they can have an immediate contact to us, and so it's no delay. And then the dispatch center is watching it, and then they can dispatch whether they need. It could be a fire, it could be a medical event, it could be an active shooter or whatever like that, and they can immediately see it in real time and get information out.
So that benefits not only the sheriff's department, but every local agency that has a school district too.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Definitely all the kids and the families of those kids in the community to know that we have something like that.
Yeah, so that was one of the late wins of the long legislative session. It came out pretty late, and they were looking for large county, Maricopa, and then they wanted a couple medium and smaller counties, less than 200,000, and so we qualified for that, and they just asked for a county sheriff to step up, and so
you're happily volunteered.
Yeah, happily volunteered to receive that funding, and so now we're going to work with the school districts to help get that. And that just happened, and so we're kind of excited about it. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like right now, but I just had a meeting on it last week. So
it's exciting. I'm glad to see that one happen. So legislature's out of session. Mm-hmm. I would assume that was kind of a downtime, but it's never a downtime for you.
So we're still working now.
Yeah, we're working right now.
So what is ACO doing when the legislature is out of session? Do they work on any kind of education for the legislators so they get a better understanding? Are you working with the different affiliate groups to prepare for the next session? What are we doing?
Well, I will say, at least for the lobbying corps, everyone does disappear for a few weeks after session.
Catch your breath.
Yeah. Usually I come somewhere up here and hide. But no, we this year is especially unique because we really don't get a breather at all, just because the session went so long. So we have a vetting process that we go through for legislative items with all of our member groups. So the sheriffs will get together, the attorneys will get together, the treasurers will get together, and they'll come up with a short list of different items that they would like to see that they can make changes in the next legislative session. And then they submit all of those to us as staff, and then our executive director sort of divvies things up. And I think at this point, I'm still waiting on the sheriffs for a couple things, but I think we have over 50 legislative proposals for next year, which is quite a bit. And
how much do you want them windowed down?
Well,
you don't want 50 bills to push the next year.
I mean, we serve at the pleasure of the board. So if the board wanted to give us 50 bills, then we'd have to try to figure out how to make it work. But usually we whittle it down to maybe 12 to 16. But it really is up to the board. So if the board wanted to give us more, then we could. We have a kind of a single subject rule in Arizona where kind of bills, you can't just have these Frankenstein bills that have education and criminal justice and elections. So one thing that we can try to do is if we have 10 different proposals from that have to do with criminal justice that make changes in a certain part of statute, we can try to combine them. So there's things that we can do to kind of get more in there for our members. But right now we just divvied up the proposals. We're starting to do research, and that's when we get back into kind of education mode. We reach out to any stakeholders that we think may be impacted by those bills, and then we start setting up those meetings, and we do a lot of education, a lot of discussion before session even starts.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So thank you for joining us, Megan. We appreciate it, and thank you for joining us this month on Shooting Straight with Brad and David. And please stay tuned for this month's Most Wanted.
Peter Joseph Ports Jr. has a valid and confirmed felony warrant for failure to appear on original charges of aggravated DUI and aggravated extreme DUI. Peter's last known address was Sholo, Arizona. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Peter, please call Navajo County Communications Center at 928-524-4050, or to remain anonymous, please call WeTip at 1-800-78-CRIME.